we have a new holiday. Today is technically kind of sort of a holiday because it's Juneteenth. Juneteenth is tomorrow, June 19th. Um, but it has been declared a holiday, this long-held celebration by Black Americans of the ending of slavery, right? And here's, of course, here's Joe Biden smiling, shaking hands with everybody as he signed it into law. An interesting note that very few Republicans, though a number in the House for sure, voted against the holiday. The fight was nowhere near as drawn out and protracted as Martin Luther King Jr. Day was. But here it is. I mean, the Senate did vote it down a few months ago or last year, and basically that last holdout Republican said, all right, I guess I won't, And so what can Congress agree on? A symbolic gesture. I still think it matters in some way. I don't think it's entirely symbolic. But this new federal holiday, which, let's see this story here in the LA Times. Juneteenth is now a federal holiday. Many Americans still get the history wrong. Of course. What is the history? The holiday is about the moment on June 19th, 1865, when Union Major General Gordon Granger told Texans that the Civil War was over and shared news of emancipation, reading aloud an order declaring, quote, absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. After all, news of General Robert E. Lee's surrender in the Appomattox courthouse 2 months prior had traveled slowly. So when formerly enslaved people finally got the news, they deemed it proper to celebrate the moment. Keep in mind, the slaveholders, they knew about emancipation. They just didn't tell the people they were enslaving. It was iconic. It was an iconic celebration for many Black Texans. Let's see here. Said Brandon Arbert, a historian at Vanderbilt University, and the celebration became increasingly popular over the decades. As Black people migrated from Texas to neighboring states, so did the holiday, Bird said. And as they continued their migration northward during the early 20th century, it became nationwide. So Biden, of course, is really happy about this and plugging it. Hey, I got something done, everybody, without a what's the word on the budget vote. I'm blanking on it, but let's hear from old Sleepy Joe.
Short, this day doesn't just celebrate the past. It calls for action today. I wish all Americans a happy Juneteenth. I'm certainly in a moment going to sign into law, making it a federal holiday. And I have to say to you, I've only been president for several months, but I think this will go down for me as one of the greatest honors I will have had as president. Not because I did it, you did it, Democrats and Republicans, but it's an enormous, enormous honor. Thank you for what you've done. And by the way, typical of most of us in Congress and Senate, I went down the other end of the hall first and thanked your staffs because I know who does the hard work. No, they're down there.
Yeah, that was nice of him to say. Bring up the staff. Hopefully, maybe they could get a raise. That would be nice. We know they're getting a holiday, but also isn't making a national holiday not the most difficult type of legislation to pen? I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but I'm sure they even have a template for it or whatever. It's been done before. But let's hear from Clint Smith. Was on Democracy Now! Today. He has written this new book that he shares these kind of vignettes of visiting different places that have historical relevance to slavery. And I'm going to share a visit of my own in a minute here, but let's just hear from him about because he makes the point that the holiday Juneteenth is not in and of itself addressing systemic racism directly. It's not addressing police violence directly. It's not addressing the historic inequalities, the wealth inequality among Black Americans from of course white Americans. It's not addressing a lot of the the environmental racism. It doesn't do any of that, but it is significant because it is an acknowledgement and a celebration of freedom and emancipation. And the fact that America had to struggle, part of the struggle last year that was also symbolic but also very important to people and in their lived lives is the Confederate monuments and Confederate named streets, schools, etc., institutions. And how a lot of those were torn down or renamed last year. But let's hear what Clint Smith has to say. He's also a writer for The Atlantic. But let's give a listen.
And, the way that I was taught about slavery growing up in elementary school, we were made to feel as if it was something that happened in the Jurassic Age, that it was the Flintstones, the dinosaurs, and slavery, almost as if they all happened at the same time. But the woman who opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture alongside the Obama family in 2016 was the daughter of an enslaved person, not the granddaughter or the great-granddaughter or the great-great-granddaughter, the daughter of an enslaved person is who opened this museum, the Smithsonian, in 2016. And so there's clearly, for so many people, there are people who are alive today who were raised by, who knew, who were in community with, who loved, people who were born into intergenerational chattel bondage. And so this history that we tell ourselves was a long time ago wasn't in fact that long ago at all. And part of what so many activists and grassroots public historians and organizers across this country recognize is that if we don't fully understand and account for this history that actually wasn't that long ago, that in the scope of human history was only just yesterday, then we won't fully understand how our contemporary landscape of inequality today. We won't understand how slavery shaped the political, economic, and social infrastructure of this country. And when you have a more acute understanding of how slavery shaped the infrastructure of this country, then you're able to more effectively look around you and see how the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way is not because of the people in those communities, but is it because of what has been done to those communities generation after generation after generation. And I think that is central to the sort of public pedagogy that so many of these activists and organizers who have been attempting to make Juneteenth a holiday and bring attention to it as an entry point to think more wholly and honestly about the legacy of slavery have been doing.
During an interview on...
Very, very interesting stuff. That's, that's what makes this important, I believe. I think Juneteenth does matter because it's really showing us, we have very few holidays that acknowledge the country's past, right? I mean, the effort to change Columbus Day into Indigenous Peoples Day, that was significant in just the way we think about. And notice these are just parts of the culture war now. Columbus Day is called that by the right, and everyone else calls it Indigenous Peoples Day, or the left, the left, so to speak, calls it Indigenous Peoples Day because it's a recognition that Columbus was a monster, right? And the way he treated indigenous people was really out the gate the beginning of mass genocide for indigenous peoples across the United States. Having a holiday like Martin Luther King Jr. Day acknowledges civil rights and a hero of the civil rights movement who was brutally assassinated, but it doesn't immediately elicit thoughts of slavery or, and think of how our, pun definitely intended, how our society has whitewashed history in regards to the civil rights movement especially. In the case of King and others, of course, just ignoring them. But to have a holiday that really asks us to sit with and recognize the reality of American slavery. I wrote about my experiences visiting last year for Juneteenth. I wrote on my blog a story. You should check it out. But I'm going to share some of it with you here now about going to a museum in New Orleans, in Louisiana, right near New Orleans. It's down the Mississippi away, or up the Mississippi, I believe. And it's this is one of the locations that Clint Smith visits in his book. His book is called How the World is Past, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. And this is the Whitney Plantation. And the story is called Juneteenth, Facing the Realities of Slavery in America. And this here is the Whitney Plantation that I visited. And many plantation museums across the South, they, again, in some ways pun intended, but also not, they whitewash, literally and figuratively, I mean, the history of slavery from these locations. Sometimes slave quarters are completely leveled and filled with rose bushes, the areas where slaves lived, enslaved people, I should say. And some plantation museums, it's the gift shop, but maybe they don't put that out front there. That they don't. Maybe there's a teeny tiny plaque somewhere that acknowledges that. But and the tours of these places focus on the people who own the property and the people, right? And they go to the big portrait of like Scarlett O'Hara or whatever in Gone with the Wind, and they go, Wilfram Belaford T, whatever his name was, Southern man, lived here, and he exported sugar cane and indigo from 1820 to 18 whatever, right? And they just focus on the architecture and the this and the that. But they don't really talk about slavery. Not so at the Whitney Plantation. And you can kind of see this visual here. They have a lot of things on this one property, a lot of artifacts that they've brought. This one, I was standing inside of this wrought iron cage. This very large iron portable prison. And there are actually three different cells. It's this long rectangular wrought iron cage, and it has three different, cells in it. And I'm in the middle one, and I'm staring at the manor house. And the tour guide mentioned how this cage, this portable prison, was found like somewhere else in the South, buried after the Civil War. Basically, it was found by archaeologists. And this kind of proves something about American slavery, that the slavers knew it was a shameful, disgusting thing that they were doing. And they were hiding. They were hiding it. They literally tried to bury the evidence of this stuff. It's kind of like what the Germans were doing, with evidence of the Holocaust. And this also helps explain the lost cause myth, the lie about, this wasn't about slavery, this was about states' rights. And anytime you hear that, someone say that and they think they're being historically accurate, though, it didn't really start over slavery, the Civil War. You are hearing a propaganda campaign so old that it has a name, and it's the lost cause myth. The Confederates began that revisionism of history, even as it was happening, as the Civil War was ending. The tour guide was really incredible. But let's see. So I have this kind of long preamble. There's that picture again. Let's see. So this is the slave quarters. They have these statues all across the property at the Whitney Plantation that acknowledge the people, the children born into slavery who were freed by the Civil War. And what's really interesting is part of the reason why these slave quarters are still intact today is because they were used to house people who worked this very property until 1970 under sharecropping. So the way that the historian who gave our tour talked about it is he said some historians have characterized what came after the Civil War, Jim Crow, sharecropping, prison labor, as second slavery. They call it second slavery. It's really incredible. Let's see. So this is interesting. The man who led us through the grounds of buildings there was James R. Kelly Jr., a historian and history professor from Alabama, who makes the commute regularly to the Whitney Plantation to guide tours. As a Californian, it was interesting to hear a white Southerner speak so frankly about the institution of slavery with his crisp Alabama accent. He laid out the reality with rapid precision, saying that slavery was inextricably tied to, quote, the realities of the system of capitalism and the failures of Christianity. And he said it just like that. Kelly explained how, as the United States acquired the Louisiana territories before the borders of the new states were even drawn, a huge influx of slaveholders and the people they deemed property came to Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama from Virginia and the Carolinas. Millions and millions of acres are open for the business of slavery, he said. Not just any land, prime farmland along large river networks, one of the largest rivers in the world right here, the Mississippi River, and that was the superhighway of the day. So, keep in mind, New Orleans was the slave trading capital of the world because it was at the end where this main artery, Mississippi River, lined up with the ocean. This is really interesting. They have these plaques with the names of people who lived on the Whitney Plantation and quotes. Here's a quote from Frances Lewis from Louisiana. She's born in 1768. She said, when children used to get a whipping, they was taught to turn around and say, thank you, ma'am, for whipping me, and bow. That was mighty hard to do, but we were never allowed to pout. If we did, we got another. And if we just needed being punished, we were put behind a door and had to stand on one foot until we were ready to say we were sorry and promise not to do it again. If we told a story, our mouths were washed out with a soaped rag. That's one of the more mild quotes, by the way. Let's see here. Later when we were in New Orleans, we passed an area where the building where Solomon Northup was the man who wrote 12 Years a Slave was sold. Now this is interesting. This historian, our tour guide said, that takes us back to how the Constitution has the 3/5 clause in it, which allowed white slave-owning states to count 3/5 of the enslaved people for apportionment in Congress, which allowed the white slave states to control the American government for the first 50 years so that 10 of the 12 first presidents are slaveholders. And that's going to be the reason why the U.S. is a slave nation longer than it's been a free nation. And then this here, look at this. So this is some more of the slave quarters, but look at these massive bowls. These were for melting down the sugar into molasses. And during the harvest, there were enslaved people working these bowls 24 hours a day. The other terrifying but also interesting thing about this plantation was it mainly cultivated sugar near that was after indigo. Indigo was like a luxury crop, but then sugar was the ultimate luxury crop. But sugar was also known as the White Death. Let me see here if I can. Okay, here it is. Sugar was known as the white gold by slaveholders and the white death by enslaved peoples, since so many slaves died while producing the crop for a variety of reasons, including the serrated edges of sugarcane leaves that left so many tiny cuts on those who tended it that they were susceptible to infection. Massive metal bowls were filled with sugarcane to boil down to molasses for shipping to the north. Products like sugar explain the grandeur of the manor houses across the South, and the main house at Whitney is a stark whitewashed contrast to the bare wood slave quarters that sit within sight of its columns and shaded second-story veranda. So this was a rare case on my website where I had visited this place and I had even recorded what the guy was saying, the tour guide, and took all these pictures, but I hadn't even conceived of my website yet. This is my website, politicalpayne.com. You can read this whole thing here. There is quite a lot here. There's a church on the property that was moved there, and it was built by people freed by the Civil War after the Civil War, and they called them anti-yoke churches, anti-yoke, like Y-O-L-K, like the yoke around their neck. They were anti-yoke churches. That's what they called them. It's really fascinating. I mean, this guy broke through a lot of the myths that we hear around slavery. Let's see. Listen to this. So he talks about a slave who was taken to the Whitney Plantation he said she was termed, this is a racist term, a mulatto, right? In the genealogical data. and he says, which tells me as a historian that quite likely her father is also her owner back in Virginia or someone in her owner's family. And once she gets here, history repeats itself. When she's 25, she has an unwanted pregnancy, and then she names the son Victor. And this was fascinating. One of the common things I hear that I heard growing up in history class around the founding fathers, and that you hear repeated by especially people on the right who want to try to, I want to feel good about my history, this bad history, it's critical race theory, all of this stuff, right? Is they say, well, so many slave owners freed their children or freed their slaves after they died. That's not the rule, guys. That's a very rare exception. And listen to this. There's a wealth of history, including reams of genealogical data, of the systemic rape of slaves by their holders, Kelly said, with an inordinate amount of attention paid to the men who freed their mixed-race children. Those were the exceptions to what was more generally and grimly the case. Quote, this is what shocks Northern soldiers when they come here, whether they're open on the race question or not. They're all shocked, Kelly said. I read the diaries all the time. They're all shocked that the white slave owners will have these children and sell them right on with the rest of the slaves or keep them in the field working for the rest of their lives. And that's what's going to happen to Victor. He's going to be enslaved until he's 35, and the Civil War is going to bring him to his freedom. There's a lot here. I also go into the German Coast Uprising, which is one of the largest slave rebellions in the United States, and it ended with trigger warning here, guys. Content warning for sure. This is a monument they have there to the rebels. This is an uprising of enslaved people, because after the rebellion was put down, they were beheaded and their heads were put on pikes along the Mississippi River and in New Orleans. If you didn't know about the German Coast Uprising, this is American history. The Charles de Landes, I believe is how you say it, his name, he was the leader. And they started at one plantation and went to the neighboring ones and organized, almost more than 200 formerly enslaved people, had an uprising, overthrew their masters, marched. They moved like an army. They grabbed whatever, implements they could get their hands on. They marched to the city. They had plans to go to Haiti, which had served as this beacon after the Haitian Revolution of a slave state overthrowing its oppressors. Some say it was planned they were going to overthrow the governor and establish a free state in Louisiana. Others say that the plan was just to get a boat and get to Haiti. But this was the reality of life under enslavement in the United States. Is you might see, heads on pikes along the river or on your way into town. I mean, that's like ancient Rome shit with, the crucified slaves going as far as, from Rome to the next city, so this is bad. We have to sit with this. We have to recognize this. Jay Andrew World in the comments is saying I should read the guy's quotes like Foghorn Leghorn. Oh, man. So I'll do that with one last story. KPKP is asking, what the fuck, is that real? Hello, by the way. Yes, KPKP, that's real. The German Coast Uprising. Here's the Wikipedia page. German Coast Uprising, revolt of black slaves in the parts of the territory of New Orleans. This area was called the German Coast because there were a lot of Germans that emigrated there. The owner of that plantation, Whitney Plantation, was German. And here's a really cool drawing from the time. On to New Orleans. Very not a very sensitive depiction, but a depiction from the time that is very interesting. So very just incredible, and the Whitney Plantation, and again, very gruesome reality of how it ended. But there is some inspiration there as well. Listen to this. Manuel, a barrel maker, escaped the property and made his way north to join Ulysses S. Grant's fighting force of black Americans in the Union Army. Kelly remarked that Grant later said that the black soldiers were among the bravest that fought in the Civil War because Manuel and others were fighting for something much more personal than anyone else in the war. And here's my Foghorn Leghorn here. He runs away. I say, sir, he runs away in 1863 from this plantation and joins the Union Army. Wears the blue, carries the gun, Kelly said. So we celebrate Manuel as a freedom fighter. And as we celebrate and honor all those names as freedom fighters because none of them chose this. That's not very appropriate. I like my Alabama. This guy really had the perfect Alabama accent. He was talking about slavery is about the realities of capitalism and the failures of Christianity. And you're just like, whoa, bro, going for it. And then the tour ended with this statue, which was returning the chain. Like basically, they had a lot of interpretive stuff there. That was super interesting. But that's the Whitney Plantation. I highly recommend if you're ever in New Orleans. Go for it. Rent the car. Nobody will Uber you all the way out there. Rent a car. That's what I did. And go check out this museum because it's a life-altering experience. And you really come to understand the significance. Even if Juneteenth is a symbolic thing, it's still significant, I think. But of course, what do you think is going to happen when something new like this comes about? The Republican majority of Republicans voted for Juneteenth as a holiday, but you could tell that they definitely are aware of their image among Black Americans and Americans of color. Post Donald Trump, they are very much aware of the times that they're living in. They're still acting absolutely lunatic about critical race theory, and we'll get to that in a second. But here was some of their reactions to Juneteenth as a holiday. And it's funny because of all people clowning on the right, it's Justin Amash. He was the House representative who left the Republican Party in the middle of Trump's term, became a independent. He's quite libertarian, but he's posting this is probably one of his staff, maybe some Gen Z kid, but goofing on Charlie Kirk. Justin Amash can hang with the best of us posters here. I say Charlie Kirk impression. This is your daily reminder that we wouldn't be celebrating Juneteenth had Republicans not freed the slaves. So, yeah, there's a little thing called political realignment, that Republicans love to say they freed the slaves, but then ignore all the history in between, like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all that. But Charlie Kirk, today's Juneteenth, celebrating the end of slavery in the United States. This was made possible thanks to Republican President Abraham Lincoln. Today, Democrats are fighting to tear down his statue. All right, here we go again. Senate Republicans are introducing legislation to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. Barack Obama and Joe Biden were in the White House for 8 years. Why didn't they ever do it? And then he followed all this up with, so this was all in 2020. So these are his 2020 tweets. Now here he is yesterday. Lincoln knew America's founding was July 4th, 1776. He knew that was the day our amazing nation made a step from ideal to reality. Juneteenth is an affront to the unity of July 4th. We now have two summer holidays, and one of them based on race. Shame on the GOP for supporting this. Charlie Kirk. Shame on the GOP for voting for Juneteenth, an Emancipation Day, celebration of emancipation. I mean, you can't say it more than that. I guess celebrating the emancipation of the slaves is an affront to unity. I guess people like Charlie Kirk don't want to celebrate the emancipation of slaves. What other conclusion should we reach from that other than that? But this is interesting. GOP Representative Ralph Norman explains his Juneteenth no vote on Fox Radio. How many holidays do we want? What's the magic number? I should do my MAGA Teddy voice for that. How many holidays do we want? What's the magic number? That would put it to 11. Do we want 20? Are we going to do it for the Native American Indians? I mean, where does it stop? This is such an easy no vote. So where does it stop the holidays for the minorities? We do have a native. We've changed Columbus Day into Indigenous Peoples Day. Guy, catch up, Ralph Norman. He's got two first names as his last name. Pretty gross. J. Andrew World in the comments says Senator Beauregard Claghorn was the inspiration for Foghorn Leghorn. Is that for real? Is that a real guy? Hold on. Beauregard. Claghorn. Holy cow, that's a hell of a name. That was a senator? Oh, dude, this is okay. Thank you for sharing that, J. Andrew World. Let's hear from Senator Claghorn, Beauregard Claghorn. Northern spies apples from Washington. Let's hear what he has to say.
From Washington. Since when do we have to import our apples from foreign places? You ought to be ashamed.
He hit a dog.
Born and bred in the South,
But, Mr. Claghorn, I have to get my apples from someplace, and they grow up north.
Then something's got to be done about it.
Well, speaking in general, I'll grant you.
Don't ever mention that name in my presence.
Ain't nothing. But what can we do, Mr. Claghorn?
Eliminate the North. Make the whole country south.
Whoa. Eliminate the North. Make the whole country south. Well, they tried that, Claghorn.
These apples southern spy. Hey, you. Claghorn's your name. Beauregard Claghorn, that is. Howdy. Now, son.
I say, sir. Now, son, listen to here. Oh, my gosh. So these guys are really, not much has changed, as you can see. Not much has changed.